Have you ever felt like the world was watching your every move? Like some unseen force was calculating your next step before you even knew what it was? Well, that doesn't matter now. What matters is what happened during my last shift at a private security firm in a small town outside of Seattle. A shift that changed everything I thought I knew about reality. I'd been working security at this tech research facility for nearly 3 years after my second tour in Afghanistan. Good pay, easy hours, and most importantly, quiet. At least, it was quiet until that night in October when the fog rolled in thick as soup. "You sure you don't want me to stay, man?" Rodriguez asked as he clocked out. "Weather's getting nasty out there." I waved him off. "Nah, I've seen worse. Besides, what's the worst that could happen in a place that makes weather satellites? If only I'd known." The first few hours were routine. Check the perimeter, monitor the cameras, do the rounds. But around 2 a.m., I noticed something strange on camera 3. A shadow moving against the tree line that didn't match the wind patterns. Was it just an animal? Or something more sinister? I radioed it in, but dispatch just told me to note it in the log. Standard procedure. But something felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, the same feeling I used to get in Kandahar before an ambush. By 3 a.m., the shadows had multiplied. And they weren't just moving, they were converging on the east wing of the facility. The wing that was supposedly under renovation, but that none of us guards were ever allowed to enter. Have you ever had that moment when your training kicks in before your brain can process what's happening? That's what happened when I heard the first window shatter. I hit the silent alarm and drew my weapon, moving toward the east wing. The corridors were eerily silent, save for the hum of equipment and the pounding of my own heart. As I rounded the corner, I saw them, 3 figures in what looked like hazmat suits, working methodically to breach the secure door to Lab 7. "Security! Hands where I can see them!" I shouted, falling back on years of training. They turned, and what I saw under those face shields still haunts my dreams. Their eyes, they weren't human. They reflected the light like a cat's, but with a cold, calculating intelligence that made my blood run cold. What would you do if you came face to face with something that defied explanation? One of them spoke, but not in any language I'd ever heard. It was like listening to electronic frequencies modulated into speech. Then, as if responding to some silent command, they scattered in different directions. I pursued the nearest one, calling for backup that I knew wouldn't arrive in time. As I chased the intruder through the winding halls, I realized they were leading me deeper into the restricted area. Doors that should have been locked opened automatically as the figure approached. What the hell was this place really researching? I finally cornered the intruder in what appeared to be a server room. But instead of surrendering, they turned and pulled out a device that looked like a small metal cube. When they activated it, the air itself seemed to ripple. "Drop it now," I ordered, taking aim. The intruder tilted their head, studying me with those inhuman eyes. "You fought in the Valley of Death," they said, now in perfect English. "You saw what they buried there. How could they know about the cave system we discovered in Afghanistan? The one my unit was ordered to seal with explosives after what we found inside." Before I could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. On the screens behind the intruder, I saw footage of what looked like a tear in the very fabric of reality opening in Lab 7. "They're coming through," the intruder said, "just like they did in the mountains. Your government knew this day would come. That's why they recruited veterans like you, hoping you'd recognize the signs." Could it be true? Was that why so many ex-military had been hired for this facility? The building shook with what felt like an earthquake. I lost my footing, and in that instant, the intruder activated their device. The air between us folded like paper, and they were gone. I ran back toward Lab 7, my mind racing. The security doors had all failed, opening the path to the heart of the facility. As I approached, I saw more of the suited figures emerging from what looked like a shimmering vertical pool of light. They were carrying containers, organic-looking vessels that pulsed with an internal blue light. The same blue light we'd seen in the cave in Afghanistan. Have you ever had a moment when you realized everything you thought you knew was just the surface of a much deeper, darker truth? I took cover and observed, knowing I was outmatched. They worked with military precision, securing the room and transferring the glowing containers through their portal. But then one of them spotted me. What happened next is still hard to describe. The figure made a gesture, and suddenly I was bombarded with images, flashes of memory from that day in the cave, but from a different perspective. I saw my unit from above, saw myself enter the cave, saw what was waiting for us inside. The images shifted to show cities I recognized: New York, London, Tokyo, but they were changed, transformed by the same blue light that now filled Lab 7. Was this a warning? A threat? Or something else entirely? The psychic assault left me gasping on the floor. By the time I recovered, they were gone, along with whatever they'd come for. The portal had closed, leaving only scorch marks on the laboratory floor. I expected armed response teams, government agents, someone to contain the situation. Instead, when dawn broke, men in ordinary business suits arrived. They weren't surprised. They weren't even concerned. They simply cataloged what had been taken and made phone calls. "You performed admirably," one told me, handing me a card with nothing but a string of numbers on it. "When you're ready for answers, call this number." I never did. Instead, I quit that same day. But I kept the card. Sometimes, late at night, I think about calling. About asking what really happened in Afghanistan and what's really going on in research facilities across the country. About the connection between what we found in that cave and what came through the portal. But then I remember those eyes, and the visions they showed me of our world transformed. Do you really want to know what's hiding in the shadows of our world? Because once you know, you can never go back to the comfortable ignorance of before. I don't know if they'll come back, or what their plans are for those glowing containers. But I do know this. There are doors being opened that were meant to stay closed, and the people opening them have no idea what's waiting on the other side. Or maybe they do. And that's the most terrifying possibility of all. What would you do if your training for war didn't prepare you for the war within? My last shift as a night guard at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in a city I won't name started like any other. Little did I know, by dawn, I'd be questioning my sanity and everything I thought I knew about the human mind. After 2 tours in Iraq, I thought I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the cold sweats, they were all part of the package deal we call PTSD. At least, that's what I believed until that night in the psychiatric ward's restricted section. "Hey, did they tell you about the new patient in room 217? Asked Mike, the day shift guard, as he handed me the logbook. His eyes darted nervously down the hallway. "Oh, someone important?" I asked, signing in. Mike leaned in close. "They brought him in last week. Military escort. No name, just a patient number. Doc Sanders hasn't left his side since." I shrugged it off. We sometimes got high-profile cases, senators' sons, disgraced officers, the usual. But Mike grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "Listen, man. The orderlies are talking. They say this guy, he makes people see things. Bad things. Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine that had nothing to do with the temperature?" My first rounds were uneventful. The ward was quiet save for the occasional moan or whispered conversation. But as I passed room 217, I heard something that stopped me cold, a voice speaking in Arabic. The same dialect I'd heard in Fallujah. I peered through the small window in the door. The room was dark except for a single lamp that illuminated a man sitting cross-legged on the bed. His back was to me, but I could see he was rocking slightly, chanting something. Protocol said not to enter patient rooms alone after hours. But something pulled me toward that door like a magnet. What would you do if curiosity and dread fought for control of your hand on the doorknob? I used my key card to enter. The patient didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all. He just kept chanting, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. "Sir, everything okay in here?" I asked, one hand resting on my baton. He stopped mid-chant. Slowly, he turned to face me, and what I saw made my heart skip a beat. His eyes were milky white, like cataracts, but they seemed to be swirling, churning like storm clouds. "You hear them too, don't you?" "The voices from the other side," he said, his English perfect despite the Arabic chanting. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir. I need you to lie down and get some rest." He smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "They found me in a bunker outside of Mosul. The one where they were conducting the experiments. You know the one, don't you? Unit 731's American cousins? How could he know about that facility? Those missions were classified at the highest levels." "You've got me confused with someone else," I said, backing toward the door. But he was faster than he looked. In one fluid motion, he was off the bed and standing inches from me. Up close, I could see strange tattoos covering his exposed skin, symbols that seemed to shift and move in the dim light. "They opened the door, but they couldn't close it," he whispered. And now what came through, it's in all of us who were there. Waiting. Growing. Before I could react, he pressed his forehead against mine. The contact lasted only a second, but in that moment I saw... God, what did I see? Images flooded my mind. An underground facility beneath the Iraqi desert, scientists in American uniforms, subjects strapped to tables, their skin crawling with what looked like black veins. And behind it all, a presence, ancient, malevolent, watching through a tear in reality. I stumbled back, gasping. The patient returned to his bed, resuming his chant as if nothing had happened. My radio crackled. "Jim? You okay? Your vitals just spiked on the monitor." It was the night nurse, Sarah. "Have you ever had to lie when your world was crumbling around you?" "I'm fine. Just tripped on something," I managed to say before leaving the room on shaky legs. The rest of my shift became a waking nightmare. As I patrolled the halls, I began to notice things, shadows that moved independently of their owners, whispers in languages that shouldn't exist, and worst of all, glimpses of what looked like black veins crawling beneath my own skin when I passed reflective surfaces. Around 3 a.m., I heard screaming from the break room. I ran in to find an orderly clawing at his own face, blood streaming down his cheeks. "They're inside me. Get them out," he screamed, his eyes wild with terror. As I restrained him, I noticed Dr. Sanders watching from the doorway, his expression not one of concern, but of clinical interest. When our eyes met, he simply nodded, as if confirming something. What happens when the people who are supposed to treat the illness become its cultivators? By dawn, 3 more staff members had similar episodes. The ward was in lockdown, but no one would tell me why. As I prepared to hand over to the day shift, Dr. Sanders approached me in the locker room. "You went into room 217 last night," he said. It wasn't a question. The patient was disturbed. I was checking on him. Sanders studied my face. "And did he share anything with you?" I thought about the visions, the feeling of something alien taking root in my mind. "No, sir. Nothing important." His eyes narrowed. "Jim, you served in Iraq, correct? Were you ever near Mosul, perhaps?" The question sent ice through my veins. "I went where they sent me, doctor." Sanders placed a hand on my shoulder. "Some wars don't end when we come home, Jim. Sometimes we bring something back with us. Something that wants to finish what started overseas." He handed me a small bottle of pills. "Take these. They'll help with the visions. We can't stop what's coming, but we can control how it manifests." "What do you do when the horror follows you home?" I didn't take the pills. Instead, I started investigating. I found out that dozens of veterans who had served in specific areas around Mosul had been quietly transferred to VA facilities across the country. All exhibited the same symptoms: psychosis, self-harm, and the ability to somehow transfer their visions to others through physical contact. 3 days after my encounter in room 217, I woke to find black veins spreading across my chest. When I touched them, I could feel something moving beneath my skin. I called the number Sanders had given me along with the pills. His voice was calm, unsurprised. "It's progressing faster than we anticipated. Come in immediately." "What is it? What's happening to me?" I demanded. There was a long pause. "We thought it was a bioweapon at first, something the insurgents had developed. But it's much older than that. The bunker in Mosul, it wasn't built by Iraqis. We found it. The thing inside, it's been waiting for thousands of years for a suitable host. A host that could travel, spread, integrate into society." "You mean us?" "Soldiers. Yes. Mobile, trained, and most importantly, traumatized. PTSD creates gaps in the psyche. Perfect entry points." I looked down at the spreading blackness. "Can you remove it?" Sanders' laugh was hollow. "Remove it? Jim, we're cultivating it. The military potential is enormous. Imagine soldiers who can incapacitate the enemy with a touch, who can spread terror through shared hallucinations." The realization of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. "You're weaponizing it." "It was always a weapon, Jim. We're just pointing it in the right direction." Did they ever think about what happens when a weapon like that turns on its wielder? I didn't go back to the VA. Instead, I went into hiding, trying to contain whatever was growing inside me. But it's getting stronger. The visions are almost constant now, glimpses of a world transformed. Humans evolved into something unrecognizable, serving the thing that came through the tear in Mosul. Sometimes, in moments of clarity, I wonder, how many others are out there like me? How many veterans came home with more than just traumatic memories? And how long before what's inside us breaks free completely? The black veins have reached my face now. When I look in the mirror, sometimes I see someone else looking back, something ancient and patient that's been planning this invasion for millennia. If you're a veteran and you start seeing things, hearing voices that speak in dead languages, or noticing strange marks on your skin, don't go to the VA. They're not trying to cure us. They're preparing us as vessels. For what? I don't know. But I fear we'll all find out soon enough. The question that haunts me most isn't what this thing is, or even what it wants. It's simpler and more terrifying. When it finally takes over completely, will any part of me still exist to witness what happens next? Could your greatest ally become your worst nightmare? I've asked myself that question every day since my final shift at the Veterans Reintegration Center in northern Colorado. What I witnessed there changed my understanding of loyalty, sacrifice, and the lengths our government will go to win a war. I'd been working as a counselor at the VRC for nearly 5 years. After 3 tours in the Middle East, helping other vets adjust to civilian life seemed like the perfect way to give back. The center specialized in treating veterans with severe PTSD and other combat-related trauma. Or at least, that's what I thought until I discovered the truth about Ward C. The day started with a cryptic message from the director. Special inspection in Ward C, eyes only. 2,200 hours. In 5 years, I'd never once been allowed into Ward C. None of the regular staff had. Have you ever felt that gnawing sensation when something you've accepted for years suddenly doesn't add up? When 10 p.m. rolled around, I made my way to the restricted wing. The security was unlike anything else in the facility: retinal scanners, armed guards, and a final door that required both a key card and a numeric code that changed daily. The director met me in an anteroom, his expression grim. What I'm about to show you violates at least a dozen international laws and twice as many ethical boundaries. But we need fresh eyes. Someone who still remembers what it means to be human. What do you say to something like that? He led me into what looked like a medical observation room. Through the one-way glass, I could see what appeared to be a standard hospital room, except for the reinforced walls and the sophisticated monitoring equipment. In the bed lay a man, or what had once been a man. This is Subject 37, formerly Staff Sergeant Thomas Reeves, the director said. He volunteered for the Lazarus Protocol in 2018 after sustaining fatal injuries from an IED. The figure in the bed was breathing, but his skin had a grayish tint. Multiple 4 lines ran into his arms, pumping a luminescent blue fluid into his veins. Most disturbing were his eyes, open but vacant, tracking movement with a predatory alertness. "What the hell did you do to him?" I whispered. The director sighed. After the disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan, the DoD became obsessed with reducing American casualties. The Lazarus Protocol was their solution, a combination of experimental nanites, synthetic stem cells, and a proprietary compound derived from research that began in Nazi Germany. He tapped a few keys, bringing up footage on a monitor. I watched in horror as a soldier, presumably Reeves before the procedure, was hit by an explosion. His body was torn apart, beyond any hope of survival. The next footage showed him in a secret facility, his mangled remains connected to machines that rebuilt him, cell by cell. "He should be dead," I said, stating the obvious. "That's the point. They all should be. We have 17 subjects in Ward C, all fatally wounded veterans who were salvaged from the battlefield. Would you want to be saved if the cost was your humanity?" As if on cue, Subject 37's head snapped toward the glass. Though I knew he couldn't see us, his milky eyes seemed to lock onto mine. His mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that had been shaped into points. "They come back wrong," the director continued. "Enhanced strength, accelerated healing, diminished pain response, all useful traits in a soldier. But there are side effects. Loss of empathy, increased aggression, and something else we can't quite quantify, a sort of hive mentality. They can somehow sense each other, coordinate without speaking." "Why show me this?" I asked, unable to look away from those dead eyes. "Because they're getting worse. And some of us believe they're working together toward something. Something they don't want us to know about." Before he could elaborate, alarms blared throughout the facility. The director's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Subject 42 has breached containment, he read, his face draining of color. This is impossible. The security protocols. The lights cut out, plunging us into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red. Through the glass, I saw Subject 37 sit up, removing IVs with methodical precision. His movements were fluid, inhuman. We need to lock down the entire ward, the director said, typing frantically on his terminal. If they coordinate if they get out? The reinforced door to Subject 37's room tore open as if it were made of paper. A figure stood in the doorway, another patient, his body covered in the same gray skin and crisscrossed with surgical scars. The two subjects stared at each other, and I swear I could feel something pass between them, a silent communication. What happens when the dead refuse to follow orders? Get security on the line, the director ordered, but the phones were dead. The emergency exit wouldn't open. We were trapped in the observation room. Over the next hour, we watched in helpless horror as more subjects broke free of their rooms. They moved with purpose, disabling security systems and eliminating any personnel who tried to stop them. It wasn't chaotic, it was coordinated, strategic. They've been planning this, I realized aloud. How long have they been conscious in there, communicating, waiting? The director's face was ashen. The sedatives, they must have developed a resistance. Built up immunity while pretending to be compliant. By midnight, they had control of the entire ward. 17 reanimated soldiers, each one a perfect killing machine, each one moving with a single purpose. They gathered in the central hub, forming a circle. In the center, they placed various chemicals and equipment they'd collected from around the ward. "What are they doing?" I asked. The director watched, his expression shifting from fear to a horrible understanding. "They're synthesizing more of the Lazarus compound. They're going to make more like themselves. Have you ever witnessed the birth of something that never should have existed? We were discovered eventually." Two of the subjects ripped the observation room door off its hinges. I expected to die, but instead, they dragged us to the central hub where the others were working. Subject 37 Reeves approached us, his movements unnaturally smooth. "You wanted soldiers who wouldn't die," he said, his voice a rasping parody of human speech. "You got your wish. Now we want more of us." The director tried to reason with him, appealing to the man he once was. Reeves tilted his head, studying him like a curious insect. "Thomas Reeves died in that desert. What you brought back was something else now. Something better." "Better?" I couldn't help myself. "You're not even human anymore." Those milky eyes turned to me. "Humanity is weakness. We've evolved beyond that." They kept us alive to help synthesize more of the compound. Days passed as we worked under their watchful eyes. I learned more about the program, how it had begun with good intentions, how the first subjects seemed normal until the changes started manifesting months later. On the 7th day, I overheard two subjects talking. They weren't just planning an escape, they were discussing infiltration strategies, how to blend in with the civilian population, how to convert others. This wasn't a simple breakout. It was the first stage of something much worse. What would you sacrifice to prevent a nightmare from spreading? I managed to sabotage the compound they were creating, adding elements that would make it unstable. When they began injecting it into the dead bodies of security personnel they'd killed, the reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The converted flesh began to break down, and the subjects themselves started to experience the same degradation. In the chaos that followed, I found a way to trigger the facility's last resort protocol, incineration of the entire ward. As flames engulfed Ward C, I dragged the director to safety through maintenance tunnels I'd memorized from the building plans. We made it out, but I never felt clean again. The government covered it up, of course. The official story was a gas leak that triggered an explosion. The families of those who died never knew the truth. I still have nightmares about those eyes, not because they were inhuman, but because I recognized something in them. The natural evolution of what we'd become after decades of endless war, beings that could no longer die, no longer feel, no longer remember what it meant to be human. The director disappeared after testifying before a classified congressional committee. The program was officially shut down, all records destroyed. But sometimes, I see news reports of inexplicable events, impossible survivals, civilians exhibiting unusual strength or agility after recovering from fatal accidents. And I wonder, did we get all of them? Or are there more out there, waiting, planning, converting others to their cause? What terrifies me most isn't the thought that we created monsters. It's the possibility that we accidentally created our replacements. If you ever meet someone who seems wrong somehow, whose eyes track you with too much precision, whose skin has a grayish tint that makeup can't quite hide, run. Don't look back. Because the war didn't end overseas. It followed us home, wearing the faces of the very people we tried to save.